Hello, everyone. Sorry you can't see me right now. I'm Taylor. Hi, Deborah.
Hi, Taylor.
Uh, we are all set. We're live. We're not live yet. Sorry, Lori, but we're ready to go on YouTube, and our Facebook page is all set, and we have closed captioning. So I'm getting ready to open up the webinar for everyone as soon as it hits noon.
Great.
Okay, it's noon. Thank you all again, and we're going live.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Deborah, it's great to see you. Thanks for spending the time with us today. I also want to start by thanking our ASL interpreter, Dr. Lori Wynot. As many of you know, I'm the ACLU Executive Director here in Connecticut, and I've been with the affiliate for 14 years. It's hard to believe time flies fast. I started as a staff attorney with us, then I became our Legislative and Policy Director, and now I'm our Executive Director. I took that role on in 2016. Deborah, you have an impressive background. You're an activist, a civil rights attorney, and currently a tenured professor of clinical law and the director of the Civil Rights Clinic at NYU Law School. You also have an amazing history with the ACLU, where you are now the national board president. Can you share a little bit with us about your career and what the ACLU means to you, Deborah?
Absolutely. And first, thank you again for having me and allowing me to join you for this conversation. Connecticut is my home and is important to me, so I'm excited to speak with folks from Connecticut. And like you, I really started my career at the ACLU, and the ACLU has been an important part of my professional life for about 2.5 decades. So serving as the national president now during this time is really an honor, and certainly the ultimate opportunity to both serve the ACLU and support the work of dismantling inequality and building the infrastructure for equality, which has been the focus of my work both inside and outside of the ACLU. After graduating from law school, I clerked for Judge Alvin Thompson, who's a federal district court judge who sits in Hartford. Just an amazing, wonderful human being. And then I started my career as a civil rights litigator as a Karpatkin Fellow with the ACLU, in large part because so many of the issues the ACLU works on have touched my life personally. Right now, the Karpatkin Fellow works for the ACLU Racial Justice Program, but back then in 1997, the Karpatkin Fellow worked for everyone in the National Legal Department. So I had an opportunity to work on all of the issues that are at the core of the work of the ACLU. So it's really hard to overstate how formative that experience was in shaping who I became as an advocate and a civil rights litigator. And as I mentioned, one of the reasons why civil rights and racial justice work means so much to me is reflected in the ACLU's motto that we're fighting for an America where we the people means all of us. And that has always spoken to me deeply. I've spent my life feeling that the Constitution and the freedoms and equality it promises didn't apply to me or to my family. And so I became a civil rights litigator to fight for the rights of people like me and families like mine and their ability to live without discrimination and to live with dignity and respect. And this has driven my work and commitment to the ACLU, but also my work at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, where I worked on voting rights, school desegregation, criminal justice reform, and educational equity cases. And now at NYU Law School, where I teach the Civil Rights Clinic and critical race theory, I am also the co-faculty director of the Center on Race Inequality and the Law. So the work of the ACLU is also my life's work, the work that I've been doing throughout my career.
You taught me a lot right there about your background. I was excited because of your leadership and your scholarship, but also because you're from Connecticut. You alluded to that a couple of times. Can you share a little bit more about how growing up in Connecticut influenced your life's work?
And I should also mention that it was the ACLU of Connecticut's litigation with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund in Sheff versus O'Neill that really started me thinking about working for the ACLU and seeing that there were lots of overlaps and connections between my work and the important work that you all have been doing for a very long time. Yeah, Connecticut is my home. I grew up in Hartford, and then my family moved to Windsor. And much of my family still lives here. My parents, my siblings, aunts and uncles and cousins. And so I'm here every holiday, basically. And living in this state has been wonderful. And it really has shaped so much about who I am in ways that I think are both positive and negative, but in the end are important to who I have become as a person and an advocate. And I think most relevant for our conversation today is the way that growing up and seeing the kind of inequalities and the deep segregation we have in Connecticut and personally experiencing it really shaped who I am. The systems that this country has so effectively built to protect and maintain segregated communities really does a tremendous amount of damage to the people who are left out. And of course, that's not because Black people or other people of color would get some magical benefit from living closer to white people, or Black children would get this magical benefit from attending school with white children. It is fundamentally because you cannot separate the places people have access to from the opportunities people have access to. Our homes, not only the physical residence, the building that we live in, but also the community in which it's located, impacts our lives in numerous and interdependent ways, because there's just nothing that place does not touch. Our access to education and jobs, our physical safety and our health, our access to healthy food, our social networks, and the number and nature of our interactions with the police. They're all deeply impacted by where we live. And in so many ways in Connecticut, we see the full array of the tools of segregation at work and the deep, deep inequalities that result from that. And it certainly has influenced my focus. I mentioned that I lived in Hartford, and we lived there for a while. And my parents, who are both from Jamaica, I'm a first generation American citizen, a first generation college graduate. And my parents, we lived in Hartford, and they struggled to provide everything that our family needed. And eventually were able to save and move us to a home in Windsor, Connecticut, because they wanted us to be able to attend better schools, to feel safer, to live in a neighborhood where we could go outside and play and ride bikes and play in our yard and do all of those wonderful things. And when we moved to Windsor, I was like 8 or 9, maybe 10. It was a very different place than it is today. And we were one of 3 families, Black families, who lived in the neighborhood. And it was clear that our neighbors didn't want us there. And I remember very clearly waking up one day to find that KKK had been spray painted on our house and on our car. And my parents having to explain to me and to my brother what that meant and why our neighbors didn't want us there. And I was afraid to live in that house. And I spent a lot of time after that with my grandparents in South Windsor, Connecticut, because I just didn't want to go back to our home in Windsor. I didn't want to play in that yard. I didn't want to go to the park there. I didn't want to go to school. And so knowing in the beginning of my life, the impact of racism in that way and that experience really shaped who I am and how I see the world moving forward. And so I love Connecticut. It's a beautiful place, a wonderful place, very different from it was when I was growing up. But there are also so many challenges here. All of the challenges we see across the country, we see them in Connecticut. And it's important that we're doing the work to kind of unravel the systems that are invisible to so many people, or the systems that we take for granted to achieve our goals of equality and equity.
Thank you for sharing all that. That is really meaningful stuff you just shared. It leads us into the heart of the conversation today, which is talking about how we could advance equity as an institution and also end systems of oppression. And I agree with what you said earlier about civil liberties really being hollow promises unless they're really backed up in a way that everyone's civil rights are respected. Not everyone can enforce their rights in the same way. And when I came to Connecticut, I grew up in New York. When I came here after law school, I heard a lot of talk from elected officials and some community leaders about how we're not a racist state, how we're so progressive and evolved. And very quickly, I learned that that was not the case through folks that I met personally, but also through doing our intake as staff attorney. It was my job when I came here to sort through our intake and saw up close and personal, and then later in interviews with folks in our prison system and in the community, that we have major racial equity problems here in Connecticut. And that folks are very quick to pretend that that's not an issue, but it truly is. And as executive director of the ACLU of Connecticut, I've really tried to lead us in a direction of centering racial equity in all of our work, because it is our biggest problem here in Connecticut, in my estimation. And we've done a lot to focus on ending mass incarceration, reducing racial disparities in the criminal legal system, and really trying to root out racism and violence perpetrated by police by reducing the role, responsibilities, and size of policing in Connecticut. 3 years ago, we launched a Smart Justice campaign, which is a campaign that is powered by justice-impacted leaders. And it has been transformative, both for the way that we do the work, the impact we have, and the policy landscape in Connecticut. And I'm really excited about that work. I know that we've talked offline about that work and how I think it fits really so perfectly with the work of National Systemic Equality Campaign that I know you have a big piece of influence on. So I'm hoping you could tell us a bit more about your goals for the ACLU now that you're national board president.
Yeah, you actually asked me like 5 questions, and I'm gonna
you have to work on my interviewing skills.
For the ones that I don't answer, you can ask me again. But I'm going to start with just the systemic inequality, and that racism is systemic. I appreciate that you have framed that question in the terms of systemic oppression and discrimination. I think you all at the ACLU Connecticut you've really been at the forefront of challenging these systems. We mentioned the criminal legal system, and from the beginning to the end, from policing to prisons to reentry, you all are doing work to fundamentally transform Connecticut's criminal legal system. I think in thinking of the devastating impact of COVID on marginalized communities, and not only racialized police violence that we've been fighting back against this year, but the broader impact of the criminal legal system and its expanding reach in province of authority. It's all about systems. Yes. There are many systems of oppression at play in the examples you listed as well. But just focusing on racism for a minute, I think that the last year has reinforced that not only do we need to think about the problems of inequality as systemic, but attack and fight them as a systemic problem. And I have found that many people really don't understand what it means to address systemic racism. So when you say people in Connecticut will say that we are not a racist state, I think that's because still, when most people think of racism, they think about a person or a group of people who dislike people of a different race and then act on that dislike. Or we're more frequently talking about implicit bias, where someone is acting on unconscious feelings. But thinking of racism only in those terms, I think, really misunderstands the true nature, power, and persistence of racism. And this understanding really overlooks the centuries-long impact of race-based laws, policies, and practices that have caused the inequality that we see today and have perpetuated racial inequality over centuries. So I think when people say we're not racist and they're focusing on that limited definition of racism, it misses the racism of sending your children to an under-resourced, heavily segregated public school, which consistently underprepares its children for college and instead puts them on track to the criminal legal system, and then having to move to a white neighborhood in order to access the kind of opportunities that you want, as my parents had to do. And those definitions miss the racism of living an hour and a half away from decent jobs because your community isn't served by public transportation, or the lack of access to supermarkets providing affordable and healthy food. Or even, the way that highways destroyed communities, including in Connecticut, and the resulting environmental stress, right? It's difficult, if not truly impossible, to find single actors responsible for those harms, and then to show that there's explicit evidence that that actor was motivated predominantly by racial animus, but it's still racism. And the focus on explicit acts of racism presumes that by eliminating the aberrant behavior of a few bad apples, we're going to root out bias within our systems. But that means that we're using tools that are too small and too narrow to be effective. And it means that we're not acting in a way that challenges the many, many ways that racism fundamentally persists in its power. So at the core, I think the work of the ACLU is about closing the gap between the America that was promised and the America that is. And if we're going to achieve that goal, we have to deepen and expand our racial justice work and focus on, as I said, challenging how racism persists in its power, and that systemically. We have today an opportunity and a responsibility to do the work to really dismantle that architecture and to challenge those systems. So as you mentioned, in February, we launched our systemic equality agenda. Mm-hmm. And that's a comprehensive racial justice agenda that seeks to address this legacy of racism and systemic discrimination in this current reality of systemic discrimination through administrative and legislative campaigns targeting the Biden-Harris administration, but also Congress, through advocacy efforts and legal strategies to strike down the laws and practices that exclude and harm. And this work will have a national focus, but of course, a key part will be state by state strategies driven by our affiliates and the work that they're doing on the ground. And the national office is excited to both partner with affiliates to do this work and also provide other forms of support for the work at the affiliate level. And I'll also just mention that we're viewing this work in a few buckets. The first is work to reconcile the past, the scars that were created by hundreds of years of chattel slavery and racially discriminatory government policies that followed are deep, and they're going to require real resources and investment in communities that have been harmed. We also need to, as I said, challenge that structure of inequality, the narrative work to change the narrative around inequality. We also have another bucket about extending empowerment. I think the barriers to full participation in the democratic process undermine our true political power and ultimately denying the right to elect candidates with shared values who can enact the kind of policies that will create equality. And what we are seeing now instead are people trampling on our rights because they want to hold on to power completely and indefinitely, only giving some access when it serves their purpose. And that's just not the way that democracy works. We're also working to build prosperity. The gaps in wealth between Black and white households really exposes accumulated inequality and discrimination, as well as differences in power and opportunity that can be traced back to this nation's inception. And that includes economic justice work, which we haven't traditionally focused on, doing work to increase access to basic financial services, like through postal banking. And then we're also trying to increase access in order to level the playing field so that everyone can achieve their highest potential. I think we have to ensure access to the tools that are necessary to thrive. That includes just eliminating barriers to reentry that you work on, ending algorithmic bias and discrimination,
Yes.
working to affirmatively further fair housing and ending segregation. But of course, it's only a part of our work. And if you want, I'm happy to talk about the other work that lies ahead, but I've spoken a lot already.
No, this is great. People hear way too much from me here in Connecticut. Value that perspective and the frame that you bring. I think it's a really useful one to look at the work that we have to do. And I think that the evolution of our work in Connecticut aligns with that. You know, we were initially, when I came here, really working in the micro and often kind of chasing our own tails and not getting systems change that needs to happen, and understanding that these are resilient systems that have been built to essentially further white supremacy, and they are very good at doing that, and they're very hard to unwind, which is again why I can't speak highly enough about our smart justice leaders, because that is the one of the antidotes, I believe. You know, when people are able to speak truth to power from lived experience, it creates a humanizing effect that makes it a lot more difficult for the holders of the power who don't want to let go to justify their practices and continuing those practices. So your words are really a nice confirmation that we and other affiliates in national are on the right track.
Absolutely. And I think, as you just really said very well, it is not just about the work that we do, but how we do that work and who does that work. And I think that that's a big change in the ACLU from the days when I started as a Karpatkin Fellow back in 1997 to today. It's a very different organization in terms of who we are as an organization, who's doing the work, and how we're engaging with communities, how we are engaging and centering the voice and perspective and the actual work of impacted individuals. I think it is a wonderful shift in how we're doing the work across the country. And you mentioned the importance of doing this systemic work. I think that's also, to me, something that was attractive about coming to the ACLU and is still attractive in wanting to give as much time as I can to support their work. It's that we're trying to focus on the systemic work, but also representing individuals, because it's important for us to change the law on the books, to create new structures and paradigms and concepts around what equality means, and to fight that, to fight to embed that in our structures and our systems. But also at the end of the day, justice depends on the ability of everyday people.
Yes.
To live lives with dignity and respect, and to access and be able to utilize those rights that we've helped enshrine. And so that means representing individuals to make sure that they are enjoying the full force of their rights. And the ACLU, I think, tries to do both of those things and does them well.
One of the things that I think makes the ACLU so powerful and effective is that we have a presence in every state. I think the affiliate network is a really powerful asset that the organization has, but also that we have full service shops. You know, we have a litigation department, we have policy departments, you have top-notch communications, and we're using those all together to get at shared goals in our state, really at racial equity. Can you speak to kind of the evolution that you've seen in the ACLU from your time as a Karpatkin Fellow to now, but also, you know, why, if you agree with me, and I think you probably do, why we are an effective organization that is worth supporting?
Yeah, I believe 100% in the transformational potential of integrated advocacy. And that's what you described, you know, litigation, public education, legislative advocacy, all working together to advance the needle, to achieve change. And as the ACLU has grown, we certainly could have just grown by adding more litigators and becoming this powerhouse 100% litigation shop. But I think what we have done is to grow in so many ways that we have folks who are litigators, the best in the country, all around the country. We have folks who are engaged in policy discussions and analysis and proposals. We have folks who are working with and in communities to build power and capacity. We are engaged in the narrative work to change the way that we talk about these issues, because the language and words are so important. We're engaged in efforts to improve and advance community education. So I think that has been the most amazing change at the ACLU is the way that we have evolved to this organization that is using every tool that's available to us to deepen and expand not only protections of our civil rights and civil liberties, but to deepen and expand our understanding of what those civil rights and civil liberties encompass. And as you mentioned, having offices in every state in the country means that we can be engaged in the fight all around the country, use the knowledge that we've gained from fighting this fight in Connecticut to fight a new challenge that comes up in Texas, or using information that we gained in a fight in Idaho to fight a challenge in Florida. It means we're always ready to go. And it is a wonderful and dynamic organization to be a part of. The work ahead is going to be challenging. The ACLU work spans across issues and really just covers the entire waterfront of civil rights and civil liberties. And the work to rebuild communities that were damaged and harmed and targeted by the past administration is really going to be a challenge for all of us. But even more, we have a window of opportunity, a small window of opportunity that I think is already closing, to really deepen and expand, as I said, the protection of fundamental civil rights and civil liberties, to really tear apart the structure that can perpetuate systemic racial inequality. And having this network across the country is going to help us do all of that work.
I totally agree. So we're winding down here. You touched on a dark period that we've just gone through as a country, and we've also gone through a global pandemic. So it's been a really rough 4.5 years for everyone in America. One of the silver linings that I find, and I think it is a real one, is that the past 4 years have made folks really aware of the need to stand up and speak out and fight for their rights, and be very careful about who they empower to protect them and expand them. I do feel really positive right now. I feel like there is an energy and an awareness around civil rights and civil liberties that I haven't seen in my first 14 years here. And our membership has grown as well. So we have a lot of supporters on this program today. And of course, we want them to stay with us, and we want to show that we're effective and have a vision. And I think seeing your leadership and your perspective helps make that case. Aside from supporting us, what else would you tell our supporters that are watching this today that they should do over the next, say, 6 to 12 months? As you say, I think we do have a window right now. Is there any advice you have for those folks?
Yeah, I would say that this advocacy has to occur on many, many levels. We tend to just focus on the big picture. So focusing on federal advocacy or statewide advocacy. And I think we've seen, particularly with response to the pandemic, the importance of being engaged in our local communities, of holding every individual actor, every elected official responsible for the oath that they took to uphold our Constitution. We're seeing now boards of education that are trying to rewrite history and write out the realities of slavery and racial inequality. And we need to make sure that folks are in front of them pushing back. And so I would ask that people get involved everywhere, at every level, not wait till it's an election year again. Right. There's important work to be done each and every day. We see that we are in a fight to defend our freedom of expression online, responding to efforts across the country to take away people's ability to protest, the attacks on transgender kids in particular, government surveillance. There's just so much. So find an issue that is important to you, use your skills, your abilities, and your knowledge to join the struggle however you can. And if you're not someone who has the time, then there are other resources that you can give. But I really do hope that, as you said, we have seen such incredible participation, people making sure that their voices are heard, people harnessing, challenging, and using the power that we have in our communities. And I hope that it continues and doesn't stop. We're seeing really scary efforts to push back, taking away the rights to protest, as people have seen how powerful protests can be, trying to take away the right to vote, as people have seen how powerful voting can be. And I hope people will not be deterred, that more people instead will join this fight and help to push back, take advantage of this window of opportunity that's going to only be open for a short period of time.
Thank you for that wisdom and the pep talk. I think you're absolutely right. The fact that there are these efforts to curb voting and curb free speech is an absolute sign that it's working. So we keep our foot on the gas and keep pushing forward.
Absolutely.
So I want to thank you, Deborah, for this really great talk. I appreciate your support of the ACLU, the affiliate here in Connecticut, and the time you give. I really feel confident that with leaders like you, we're on the right track to justice, and we're going to get a lot done. I'd also like to thank everyone else who joined us today online. I appreciate your interest and commitment to our work and our organization. Thank you again to Lori for signing and her expertise here today. There will be a recording of this conversation made available soon on Facebook and YouTube. Please share it out with your friends. This is some valuable information that we all got today. And follow us on ACLU-CT.org. We're on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And I hope everyone has a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah.